Well, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many friends and new friends to join us in this morning's wonderful panel discussion. I'm Nan Filer. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. And I just really want to welcome you, and for our, all of our supporters, which I know you all are, to really sincerely thank you. It's been a Zoom kind of year, and here we are again. But one of the highlights of the year was Andrew Swainson's freedom and exoneration. And we're here both to celebrate that and to learn from his experience, and also from his attorney, Nate Andrisani, Nilam Sanghvi, who will facilitate, and Andrew Wellbrock, who's with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Conviction Integrity Unit, who is also instrumental in Andrew's release and exoneration. So I'm going to stop there, really. I just wanted to welcome you and turn it over to Nilam, who will facilitate the conversation. She may start with a few comments about the year we've had, and then we'll open it up to some question and answer. Please put your phone on your video, and it looks like you all did pretty much, on mute. You will have an opportunity to ask questions through the chat feature. Nilam will talk a little bit more about that, so hopefully we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this morning's presentation. I think it's going to be great. Nilam, take it away.
Thanks, Nan. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many supporters and familiar faces with us this morning. As I think many of you know, I'm the legal director here at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. And we thought we'd just do a little look back at 2020 before we start with our panel discussion this morning. It's been, as I'm sure for everyone, quite an interesting year. And when we were told to stay at home, we were obviously really anxious about the effect that this would have on our work, and particularly on our clients. But looking back, now that we're in December, it's been a year, thankfully, of more highs than lows, but certainly there were lows and challenges along the way. We were lucky to have 2 exonerations in 2020, Daniel Carnival in Allegheny County, right in March of 2020, released directly from the Allegheny County Jail to quarantining at home. And Daniel's was the first exoneration that was spearheaded by our Pittsburgh office that opened in 2016. So that was a great milestone for us. And then of course, Andrew Swainson's exoneration in June, and you'll hear much more about that today as well. We were able to host 64 interns in our clinical and internship programs via completely remote work, except for a couple months at the beginning of the year. And we're really happy about how we were able to successfully transition the educational part of our mission. Our social worker, Margaret Mason, is here this morning. She managed to successfully transition our reentry program to remote work and get our exoneree support group up and running via Zoom, which has actually made it easier for clients who are not in the Philadelphia area to engage with us. So there have been some silver linings to all of the Zooming. There have, of course, been some lows, the biggest challenge being that our clients who are not out with us are in prison, where COVID has been running rampant, and we have been calling on the governor and the Board of Pardons to consider more expansively using their powers to try to release folks. But thus far, those efforts have been unsuccessful. And unfortunately, one person who we've worked with for years was the first state prisoner in Pennsylvania to die of COVID. So while 2020 has had many highs, it still has had many challenges, and we really appreciate all of your support as we continue our efforts to try to get innocent folks out of prison. At this time, it's more important than ever given the public health implications. But today we're really here to celebrate a high and to learn from the experience of Andrew Swainson and the rest of us who worked with him through the years to fight for freedom, to learn about his personal experience and also the lessons that his case could teach us about the criminal justice system. So I'll now just introduce briefly again, we have with us Andrew Wellbrock from the Conviction Integrity Unit in Philadelphia, who investigated Andrew Swainson's case on behalf of the District Attorney's Office, Nate Andrisani at Morgan Lewis, who represented Andrew for many, many years, and of course, Andrew Swainson himself, who we're so happy to see here with us on Zoom instead of at SCI Dallas, where he was unjustly incarcerated for over 3 decades. As Nan mentioned, we'd love to have some interaction, so feel free to pop any questions into the chat function. You can just type them into the chat box, and Cooley and I will be taking a look at those, and we'll be happy to pass them on to our panelists along the way. So I'd first like to start with you, Andrew Swainson. We have 2 Andrews, so if things get a little confusing, we'll just roll with it. But Andrew, you've been home for about 6 months now. You, like our client Daniel, were released from prison into a strange, pandemic and quarantining environment. And we'd love to just hear a brief update on how you're doing and what your life has been like since you've been able to come home.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to present myself and represent guys who were fortunate to, I consider, was dead once and now is alive. This is really a rebirth coming from one environment to another environment, and I'm so happy, and there isn't enough words to express the happiness inside of my heart for me, to have this transition. Even though I'm happy, I'm sad too. I'm here, and a part of me is still over at the institution because I've grown in the institution for an extended period of years, to be precise, 32 years. So I've grown with guys that I've known as consider a young man to today, an older man. And my heart really grieves for those guys, especially the ones who are actually innocent. I can understand someone may have been responsible for the crime and was given a life sentence. At least in their heart, they can say, I messed up somewhere along the line. Why did he mess up? I don't know. Maybe society never gave him an opportunity to expand. Maybe he had the opportunity, but he never had the motivation. Maybe there wasn't a family setting that allowed this individual to want to do better for himself. It could have been the environment these guys grew up under. And the fact of the matter is, the choice was made, the act was done, and once that bullet has been fired, you can't take it back. So what I'm trying to say is, as an innocent man doing a life sentence, it is extremely excruciating in so many different ways. But as a person who actually pulls the trigger, at least within himself, he can find some type of comfort to know that he did commit the crime. So it is so much difficult for one to really understand what it is to be in prison with a life sentence as an innocent man.
Andrew, thanks for sharing those thoughts. It reminds me really of a feeling that I had when Nate and I were in the parking lot at SCI Dallas waiting for you to be released. This really joyous feeling, but also remembering our other clients who were still behind those prison walls, who we would not be, driving home with that day. And I think what you just said really brings that point home. And I'd like to sort of turn now to one of the main themes of your case and so many others, which is official misconduct. Some kind of official misconduct is involved in 72% of exonerations in homicide cases. It's really one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions. And so turning to Andrew Wellbrock now, at the hearing that we had in June leading to Andrew's exoneration, you emphasized the high clearance rates, the quote unquote solved homicides in Philadelphia in the 1980s and 90s, and the pressure on the police department to clear cases in the city at that time. Can you talk a little bit more about that climate and the effect it had on homicide convictions in the city?
Sure. So, I mean, that wasn't any kind of extensive study. The city of Philadelphia publishes all of their statistics. So we know that in the late 80s into the early 90s, the city was pushing 450 to 500 homicides a year. Probably very similar to what we're looking at this year. Back then, in any given year, there was like an 86 to 90% clearance rate, meaning that the police had either arrested someone who had been charged with the crime, they had identified who the perpetrator was, but for whatever reason, charges were not being brought, or the perpetrator was unable to be brought to justice, meaning they were already deceased. So that means they were getting the guy or girl 90% of the time. I contrast that with now, where we're lucky if we hit 35% in a given year. So what's changed? Did murderers become more crafty at killing? Or are we dealing with the exact same level of street crime, if anything, with more tools to catch perpetrators, such as surveillance cameras, cell phones, the internet, what have you, forensic techniques, but we're not doing, global we, not doing nearly as, well, we're not hitting nearly as many runs out of the park as they were in the 90s. So what's the reason for that? I think what I intimated at the hearing was they're either that good or that bad. And I think what we learned through cases like Andrew's and with Anthony Wright's, they were just that bad. And, unfortunately, it's taken us this long to really uncover, a small portion of that.
So one of the things that happened that Andrew's case really highlighted is, the bad things that happened, the failure to follow up on leads, the failure to disclose evidence pointing to alternate perpetrators. It took over 3 decades to uncover all of that. How can we, in your view, Andrew, and then I'm interested in Nate's views on this topic as well. Nate's a former prosecutor, now has obviously worked on the defense side. Interested to hear from both of you. What do you think we can do going forward to prevent that type of opaqueness and lack of disclosure from affecting investigations and convictions in the future?
Sure. So I actually gave our new class of DAs a training on Brady and Giglio yesterday afternoon. And we make the policy in the DA's office very simple now. It's just disclose, disclose, disclose. If there's something in your file, turn it over. If it's going to hurt you and it's a negative fact in your case, the defense needs to know about that. If it's a negative fact, but you can argue it away, do so. But it also means you have to be considering those negative facts. And the number one issue that we run into with that is that the police aren't necessarily telling us everything. They don't have a legal obligation to turn over their file to us. Back in the 80s, when they would turn over charging packets to the DA's office, statements would be marked pertinent or non-pertinent. And it's very possible that the non-pertinent or informative statements were not being turned over to the DA's office, meaning they weren't being turned over to the defense. Solution like they did in Texas with the Michael Morton law, I think certainly covers that, meaning that the police have criminal penalties if they don't turn everything over to the DA's office, and the DA's office has ethical obligations if they don't certify they've turned everything over. I know that our new discovery rules are going to have something to that effect, but the police aren't governed by discovery rules. So the best that will really effectuate is we are able to tell the defense attorney, you have what we have, but we don't have everything. So at least we're both in the dark, but I don't think that solves any mistakes. It's really law enforcement needs to have the obligation to turn everything over to the lawyers.
Nate, do you want to weigh in on your sort of experience with dealing with this problem in Andrew's case and taking so long to find the information that ultimately helped set him free?
Sure. Good morning, all. It's an honor to be here. I was in the Philadelphia DA's office, the same office that we were dealing with Andrew's case in the mid to late 90s. And I was blessed there to have great mentors. And one of my mentors there gave me tremendous advice, and it echoed the advice that I had received as a law student at Temple, which was to make sure my moral compass pointed due north. And as a DA, one of the things that hindered us often was our file was quite lean. There wasn't a whole lot of police paperwork. And I remember one of my mentors telling me often, there should never, I mean, except for your own handwritten notes, there should be almost nothing in your file that you haven't turned over to the other side, because there's no reason not to. There's no reason you don't have to turn it over. There's no reason that you want to ever be in the situation where you have information that the defense didn't have, even if you don't realize at the time that it's valuable to the defense. Turn it over, let them have it. If you believe in your case and the evidence points to it beyond a reasonable doubt, there's no reason why you can't give them all of the evidence that you have. And that was a great blessing that I was given. When I look back and think about the culture, think about the power that we had as prosecutors, I think one of the things that our society and our prosecutors need to look at going forward is how best to treat their roles. As a prosecutor, your role is to prove a case. You're not necessarily, the police are not your client, and you're not teammates in that regard, such that, you know, whatever the police tell you is not gospel. You need to think about it with a critical eye as a lawyer, and think about whether or not this makes sense and this is what you're actually trying to prove. You're not just there as a spokesperson for a client. And I mean, as I look back and when I speak to former prosecutors that now are in private practice or doing other things, one of the things we all miss the most about our time as a prosecutor is that we were knighted, so to speak, with the obligation to do justice, not on behalf of a specific client, but on behalf of justice. And if you're just doing the bidding of the police or just doing the bidding of a detective or an investigator, you know, and just up there trying to prove the case that they've brought to you, then you're being any hack lawyer off the street that's got a case, you know, that some client hired them to be the proverbial mouthpiece for. So I really think that we need to make sure our prosecutors are raised and trained in that atmosphere where they can think critically about it, where the relationship between the prosecutor's office and the police in whatever jurisdiction it is has a relationship such that it's not adversarial, but it's also not, you know, it's not joined at the hip where there can't be real discussions about what is a case and what isn't.
And on that note, sort of turning back to Andrew Wellbrock, I know since we've had the Conviction Integrity Unit here in Philadelphia, you all have really made this a focus, that increased transparency and turnover files. Now that you've been a career prosecutor, now that you've been with the CIU for a few years, what do you see as the role of conviction integrity units and your unit in particular in looking back at old convictions?
So obviously a big part of our work is correcting past mistakes, but I see a big role of the unit as being the role model for the office. So when new prosecutors are coming in, they have, you know, a unit to model their practice over. For the first time since 1963, the Philadelphia DA's office has its very first written Brady policy. The DA put it out probably about a month or two ago, but it puts the Conviction Integrity Unit as the sounding board for all Brady questions. So municipal court all the way through homicide and the investigative units, if you have a question regarding how to handle an issue in your case, whether you know, a witness has recanted in a prep session, you don't know what to do with your notes in that, you don't know what to tell the defense, you're supposed to come to the CIU. So obviously that was a lot harder when the unit was two of us. We have 9 or 10 prosecutors now, and then 3 first-year DA fellows who are going to spend their first year as prosecutors with our unit before going back into the trial division or appellate divisions, with the hope that you know, we can be mentors, we can maybe you know, infect the office with a positive culture, that, was certainly lacking when I started in 2008.
So great advances being made, I think, and hopefully a model for other counties within the state as we move forward. Turning back to Nate and Andrew's case more specifically, Nate, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to represent Andrew and what really drew you to his case and convinced you of his innocence?
Sure, like anything else, like so many other blessings in my life, I was somewhat chosen for this by happenstance. My good friend, law school classmate, and trial partner on the trial team at Temple, and also trial adversary when I started at the DA's office and she was at the PD's office, was in Nilam's spot 10 or 11 years ago as the legal director at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. And I had helped to push her towards that position. So I helped to get Morgan Lewis involved with Innocence Project cases. One of my partners had taken on Andrew's case, a good friend of mine, Vicki Miller. And when she was getting ready to leave the office in 2013, she asked, leave our office at Morgan Lewis, she asked me if I would take on the case. So I took it on without knowing Andrew, without knowing the case much, and got involved with our case team. And as an impediment sometimes to the cases that big firms take on is that we have young associates working on these cases and they move on. So we had a number of great lawyers work with Andrew over time, and I got up to speed with them. In getting to know Andrew and getting to see the file and particularly read the transcript. Andrew and I had many conversations about his trial and his representation at trial. I was heartbroken in reading the transcript of Andrew's trial because it was mind-numbing to me that in our society, some of the rule, you could see the power that a judge can have to put their thumb on the scales of justice in a case. But I also saw how incredibly powerful it is to get up and say that you represent the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and somebody's been killed and we can tell you who to blame, because in law school, you would have never imagined that the evidence that was in Andrew's the trial transcript would amount to beyond a reasonable doubt. Lay people would look at it and say, there's no way that folks could convict beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence in the transcript. So many things were missing, so many pieces, so many leads were left unturned. There was so much doubt, let alone his innocence. There was so much doubt just in the trial transcript. It was unreal. So in getting to work with Andrew and start to piece together all the things that not only were missing, but that the police had done or not done simply to get to an end. And I mean, the takeaway that I had from this case, besides what the police did or what the individual prosecutor did, was how sad it was for the victim's family that his life, the victim in this case, his life was so diminished by our society in terms of how we valued it, that there wasn't a real effort to find the person that killed him. And that's tragically sad. The next tragically sad part was that instead of finding the person they killed him, they grabbed the man that they should have known did not do it and put him in prison just simply to satisfy a statistic and the public's craving for a conviction.
And Andrew Swainson, on that note, turning back to you, you had a trial where you weren't happy with the representation, and for many years, I'm sure felt like you were fighting this case on your own, and then eventually you ended up with support from the Innocence Project in New York, from us here at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project when we opened, and from Morgan Lewis. So by the end, you had a whole army behind you. How did it feel to go from kind of being on your own to having this team?
It was a beautiful feelings. It was relaxing. It gave you a sense of hope it tells you that even though there are people who did you wrong, there are more people who are willing to do you right. It was beautiful. It brings the stress level down to some extent, even though, you know, there are times when you and the attorneys, me and my attorneys, we couldn't see eye to eye at times. You know, we got different methodology of proceeding with the case, and it kind of create a little bit of conflict here and there, but we pushed through that and we overcame, because my understanding of the law is actually different from an attorney who really went to law school and get a better grips and better understanding of the law. So I had to understand that I really never went to law school. So what I'm saying may not necessarily be the right way. So it's best for me to rely upon my attorney. It's best for me to trust my attorneys. It's best for me not to think that because my attorney has a different method, he's really not with me. But these are the thoughts that comes up after you went through a trial like I did. So I would have considered myself suffering from PSD, because I keep reflecting back to what my trial attorney did to me. And I kept reflecting back to my appellate attorneys, what they have done to me. So it was some sort of conflict between a new attorney who comes in and says, Andrew, I'm actually here to represent you. But the thought of what I've got in the past keep coming back. So in my mind, I'm thinking this is how we must proceed. But the lawyers is saying, we won't proceed this way. We're going to proceed this way, my way. And that right there was such a hell of a struggle. But at the same token, at the end of the day, I have to say, I must at least trust him, at least give him an opportunity. Just like I'm asking for an opportunity to get back to society, I says, I must give my attorney an opportunity to represent me in the way he feel is best, and it's the best for my representation.
And Andrew, let me interrupt you for a second. I'm sorry, I was just going to share with the audience a little bit of what you're referring to. And we were both blessed to have Andrew Wellbrock come into the case, because we found someone who was willing to listen to us and to actually do some investigation. But the hardest thing that Andrew Swainson and I had when we got involved with one another and in this representation was Andrew wanted to prove his innocence. And based on the facts of the case and based on an eyewitness that was deceased but had testified, despite all the evidence we had of them lying, of them being unable to actually see what occurred, all the different things that pointed to Andrew's innocence, we would never be able to. There was no DNA, there was no scientific proof that we were ever going to be able to have that was going to prove Andrew's actual innocence, in terms of science or something that you would see on TV. And for an innocent man, I imagine for Andrew Swainson, that was incredibly difficult. He didn't want me to just get him out of prison. He wanted me to show the world that he was innocent. And the discussions we had often was that the evidence wasn't going to allow that, but we could show clearly that the prosecution and the police cheated in the trial, that all the evidence points to Andrew's innocence, but we didn't have some scientific magic bullet or DNA that would prove, be the last page of the of the novel that shows, you know, the videotape of somebody else committing the crime. And that's, Andrew and I went back and forth on that for many, many months and years on our strategy, because I can only imagine how difficult it is to not, you know, Andrew's thirst for justice here was not just to get out of prison. It was to prove never been arrested before, never committed a crime before, you know, and to be accused of killing his friend who he didn't kill. He didn't just want to get out. He wanted to prove to the world that what he had been saying for all these years was actually true. And the hardest part that we had was our path to success in the way the Pennsylvania laws are set up was not to go and retry the case and prove that, but rather to show all the things that had been done that had violated Andrew's rights and had made it so that he did not get a fair trial. And that, you know, when you look at the evidence, as I think Andrew Wellbrock can explain better than I, no prosecutor would look at the totality of the evidence and say, oh yeah, this is the case we should bring. This is the case where we think we have evidence against Andrew Swainson. The evidence doesn't point there.
And I think, you know, Andrew Wellbrock, you alluded to that at the hearing in June, that this was a weak case to start with. You know, maybe something that wouldn't be even charged today. Do you have a perspective on, you know, whether a case with this type of evidence would even be brought in the first place at this point?
So, I mean, there's still so much about this case that I don't think we'll ever really have a good perspective on, because people didn't keep the notes back then, or maybe they just didn't in this case. We will never know what made the detectives decide to focus from the original defendant and how to turn him into the star eyewitness. I mean, that's the first fact about the case that kind of blew me away. I don't think we're ever really going to have a good rationale as to why you would focus on someone with no link to the scene that night over someone who is observed by the police officer, who is 100 feet away when he hears the shot fired, sees the person running away. The gun is found on that person's route. That person is bleeding because they were so close to the shotgun blast that it hit them. I don't know how you turn that person into the witness and end up having them point the finger at someone who there is no physical evidence that places them there. Secondary to that, we have kind of a I told you so witness whose story just completely changes. In her initial statement, she points out one person. By the time trial comes around, she has substituted Andrew's name for that individual. You know, I can't be sure, but I'd assume some of Andrew's distaste with his trial attorney probably stems from that. She is hardly questioned at trial over her complete change in story. So I think a few things would happen differently today. I don't know that we would ever take those steps to change a defendant into a witness. You know, a cooperator is a different thing, but this person was solely a witness. He did not plead guilty to any charges on the case. That's who Nate referred to as since passed away. We would have certainly disclosed the information that undercuts the flight instruction that I think was really instrumental in convicting Andrew wrongfully. And there certainly would have been a much more detailed look into why that friend of the victims changed her statement so thoroughly by the time trial came around. We don't charge single eyewitness case without corroboration now. And this case, and I think many others from that time period, are solely lacking in that.
Please also tell us that the Commonwealth wouldn't lock up the eyewitness under a fictitious name to prevent them from being extradited to New Jersey to serve their prison sentence, locked away and held in prison secretly until they appear at trial to testify under the coercion of the government.
Hopefully not. But I think one of the problems with any large organization is that it's impossible to follow what every single prosecutor is doing in every single case. So while I could say there would certainly be repercussions if something like that occurred without, being fully transparent about it, that's not to say that one of our 300 prosecutors could not pull a trick like that without getting caught. All you can do is set a standard and hope that people follow it and, have appropriate repercussions. I mean, I think as a legal community, we've all done a great job at holding people to a different standard than back then. I mean, one of the things that I frequently say is people self-selected to be prosecutors. I did myself. It doesn't make us good at what we do. Our reputation and what we do while we are prosecutors is what sets that standard. Just winning trials does not make you a good prosecutor. But I think for so long, that was the standard. People want to know how many convictions you had, how many losses you had. When you read former prosecutors' bios when they leave the office on firm websites, it's always, this person has tried over 100 jury trials to verdict. But did they try the right cases? I hope that's what my legacy as a prosecutor ends up being, that, I tried cases that needed to be tried. I pled out cases that were appropriate for that. And, I tried to do the right thing. I think a lot of time we solely focus on numbers. And I think that's where you end up in this trap of, inappropriate performance metrics that result in basically incentivizing making these mistakes. I mean, for example, up until Larry came in as DA, we had an award in our lobby named after the prosecutor in Andrew's case and Walter Ogrod's case. And it was for exemplary service as a trial prosecutor. It's named after her and Roger King. I didn't know either of them, but I think it's, telling that that was the standard that up until 2018, homicide prosecutors wanted to reach. And I'm just seeing Melissa's question. I'm just going to go ahead and answer it, Neil. That's okay.
Let me just, read it so that people who don't have their eye on the chat. So we have a question from Melissa. We're talking about how this case wouldn't be brought in Philadelphia today. Hopefully, are there other areas of the Commonwealth where something like this might still have gone forward? And are there conviction integrity units in other areas of the state? So Andrew, if you want to weigh in, go for it. And then I can give some context as well.
So the Attorney General's office has a conviction integrity unit. And then the Dauphin County, I believe it is, DA's office, or Center County, has Center County. They call it an integrity unit. It basically covers our special investigation, so our public corruption plus conviction integrity. But I think that's it. I've heard the former Chester County DA talk about how in a smaller office you don't need one because all your people are trained to do that work anyway. Maybe in a perfect world, but Montgomery County has, or at least they had, one guy, I'm drawing a blank on his last name, his first name is Steve, who's like their internal auditor. That's a similar function. But we are no longer part of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association. So I think it's very hard to say what other jurisdictions would do. I think it's very likely a case like this could and still would be brought elsewhere in the state. We don't really help steer the policy because they lobby for different things than we do. So it did not make sense for half of their membership to be from the Philly DA's office. And the Philly DA's office only gets one vote towards statewide policy. So I think it's very possible that you could step, 30 miles west of Philadelphia. And, obviously, as we've seen in recent weeks, you're in a different world.
Yeah, I think that's right. As you all know, we litigate cases all over the state, and my sense from working in other counties is that cases like this might well still go forward. The new Chester County DA recently announced that she's hoping to start a conviction integrity unit, so hopefully more units like this will help change direction. It's a challenge, I think, because some counties are small enough that they probably don't have the resources or the caseload to support a full conviction integrity unit, but obviously things probably happen in those counties that need to be looked at. And so hopefully the statewide AG's conviction integrity unit will help with that, although it relies on the cooperation of the various counties because they don't have any authority on their own to come in and just look at cases. So it'll be interesting in response to your question, Alyssa, to see if we see more progress throughout the state on these types of issues. Turning back to something that Andrew Swainson said a few minutes ago, I think it's really thoughtful to make us think about, you have to take that leap of faith to work with an Innocence Project, to work with a private law firm after having no reason to trust lawyers for so many years. But once Nate got involved and once we got involved, it was still a struggle. There was, for a long time, no clear path towards exoneration in your case. And this is really a question for both Nate and Andrew Swainson. How did the nature of this case change once the conviction integrity unit agreed to review it? How did that change the ball game, so to speak, for seeking justice for Andrew? Nate, do you want to start?
Sure. I think when Andrew and I were plotting our path forward and we became aware of this new conviction integrity unit and of Patricia Cummings coming to take charge of it, because there had been some semblance of a similar type of unit previously that we didn't have much faith in getting us where we wanted to go and seriously taking a look at it. When we got the meeting with Patricia Cummings and with Andrew Wellbrock and the DA's conviction integrity unit, and we started to lay out, and Andrew Swainson unfortunately wasn't able to participate in that meeting, but my colleagues and I were able to, and the Innocence Project were able to lay out the evidence that we had that pointed in so many different directions from Andrew, and the evidence of cheating that made it all the more likely that if you've got the actual evidence pointing away from Andrew, and then you've got all this cheating, it would tell you that obviously they're rigging the system to get the wrong man. They immediately started to look with an eye towards, yeah, that doesn't make sense. And we've heard similar things with this detective. We've heard similar things with this DA. And they started, having access to information that we don't have on the outside. The DA's office was able to piece some things together. I think what was most helpful in terms of the conviction integrity unit was their willingness to actually listen to what I said. And when I say that, a heartbreaking thing personally in this case for me was that people that I had worked with, former colleagues of mine, folks that I stayed friendly with over the years, I had had personal discussions with them about the evidence that we had uncovered. And I asked them to look into certain things in the trial file and to tell me, if I'm barking up the wrong tree, let me know. But this is what I think I've uncovered here. And when I was saying that, I meant that they had hid the star witness under a fictitious name in a Philadelphia County prison for a year and forced him to testify against his will in order to get out of that prison, and without letting the DA's or without letting the defense know that the person was incarcerated under a fictitious name on this case. And when Andrew Wellbrock got involved in the case, and those DAs that I had spoken with and my former colleagues told me, one, they couldn't find the actual file, and two, there was nothing to corroborate what I was saying. When Andrew Wellbrock looked at the case, the first thing he saw was that there was actual evidence that our theory was fact. There was actual evidence that the DA and the detective knew that they had locked the star witness up under a fake name and were holding him until he got done this trial. And that was heartbreaking to me. And I've said this to Andrew Swainson, one of the most heartbreaking thing to me was that even in this day and age, that was 2016. In 2016, the DA stood before the court and swore that that I was making stuff up, that there was no basis for what I was saying. And what was heartbreaking to me was I don't believe she looked at the file and disregarded that evidence. I believe she was too lazy and too uncaring to even look in the file. And that broke my heart. And that's the thing that I think the Conviction Integrity Unit brings to justice here, is that they're taking a real look to make sure that where there's evidence pointing in another direction, to make sure we got it right. And I think, Andrew Swainson and I crossed our fingers for a couple years with the CIU, but we had real hope. It was just the time that it takes and the time that the court took to hear the case made it frustrating. But I think we kept our eye on the prize the entire time and had trust and faith. And both of us owe a whole lot to Andrew Wellbrock for treating this case like a true lawyer and a true prosecutor should, which is searching for evidence and searching for justice, and not just trying to preserve a conviction.
One thing I'm going to chime in on real quickly, while I do appreciate the credit for simply looking at a file, it was actually one of our interns who is now one of our new DAs and one of Melissa's former students at Temple. So if anyone encounters Adam Ferre, he's one of the new prosecutors. I mean, he really deserves the credit for taking the time and locating the paperwork that corroborates what Nate and Andrew were saying all along.
Good job, Temple grads. Andrew Swainson, turning back to you as we kind of wrap up here. Nate just walked us through, the frustrations of dealing with the prosecutors in this case, even after, he got involved. 7 years from the time Nate started working on the case with us to 2020 when you were exonerated. Did you ever believe that the prosecutors actually would end up agreeing with you? What did it feel like to hear Andrew Wellbrock say that your conviction should be vacated, and then, in that hearing in June, to have, the judge agree? Andrew, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. I had a little bit of technical difficulties with my my equipment. In regards to your question you just asked, how do I feel? I want to say that I was heartbroken from the start. From the very start of the trial, I was heartbroken for the simple fact I tried to assist the police officers in the necessary ways that I thought, would have been beneficiary to help solving the case. And I think they take that, and for some reasons, they decided they was gonna just zoom in on me. And once they have me, that was the end of the investigation. It's like having a blinkers on a horse while he's running a race. And the purpose of the blinkers they put on the horse is so the horse won't be looking all over on the track. And I think the approach of the police officers is totally wrong. They need to take the blinkers off and stop zooming on one individual. They need to be open-minded, and they need to really go out and search for the evidence, because the evidence is there. It has been proven from the greatest scientists that, whenever somebody commits a crime, he always leaves something at the crime scene. And again, Nate would say the prosecutor was lazy. And I really believe the prosecutor was lazy. And also, not only was the prosecutor lazy, is that my personal feelings about it is the prosecutor has no compassion towards someone who they are already in the sight, are in the line of fire. And as a result of that, the system is going to prove that, you know, the prosecutor really and truly has no compassion for someone who is actually innocent. The prosecutor's job is to seek justice and not a conviction. In my case, the prosecutor only objective was getting a conviction by any means necessary. I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken from the trial when I had actually one witness who testified against me. And I had 12 jury who listened to this one person and find me guilty. My trial was like a one-day trial. And the prosecutor decided they was gonna prosecute me in spite of the fact that they knew I was an innocent man. And they persuade 12 people that an innocent man was responsible for a crime in which the prosecutor knew he was not responsible for. And 12 jury came back and convict me. The prosecutor has a lot of power. The prosecutor has a lot of influence on society. I believe today, when you have prosecutors coming up and we train in these prosecutors, we need to take these prosecutors to a system where we teach them about honesty and fairness and not so much about winning. Right now, everything is based on win, win, win by any means necessary. And it's not how the case is. It is, if there is evidence, you pursue the evidence. If there is no evidence, you drop the case. But today, our prosecutors, I believe under the new administration of Andrew and Patricia and the new district attorney, I believe the path has been shifting a little better towards a more humane and a more justice prosecution. And I believe the path that we are on right now down in Philadelphia, where, you know, the integrity unit comes in and says, I'm changing the culture of corruption. I think this is the right path. And I believe people now can say the system will work better than it has been working in the past.
And for those that don't know Andrew's case, when he talks about one person testifying against him and the jury believing him, the one person was obviously an eyewitness to the crime because he was covered in blood and found running from the scene by the police 15 seconds after the shotgun blast. But that person was on the dimly lit porch of a drug house in West Philadelphia at 3:40 a.m. after a night of getting high, searching out more drugs. That person told the police that there were two gunmen and there were two shotguns found at the scene, a rifle and a shotgun, that there were two gunmen, described one as a brown-skinned dude and was never asked to give a description of the other. So the only physical description of the shooters was a brown-skinned dude, which unfortunately Andrew and 40% of the Philadelphia population matched that description. And never asked for a description of the second gunman, never showed pictures of the second gunman, never did any interviews in an attempt to find the second gunman. I mean, this was a case that literally they took this witness's statement, said, brown-skinned dude, okay, we can put it on Andrew Swainson as long as he'll point to Andrew Swainson, end of case. despite all the other evidence. I mean, the evidence in the file showed when the CIU looked at it that when they listed the perpetrator of who got the blood on the eyewitness's body at the time because he had gotten his finger cut, they listed another person as being the shooter on the police paperwork. They didn't care. They just had Andrew in mind. And when he says putting blinders on that horse, they decided that they wanted Andrew for whatever reason. He matched the brown skinned dude, and they found a pawn that they could manipulate. And when they couldn't manipulate him, they locked him up in prison and held him there for a year until he did what they asked him to do.
This case still goes on for me. I've been home for 6 months, but I'm still traumatized. I'm taking it one day at a time. There are so much emotions that bottled up, and trying to express the emotions is difficult. But you got to understand, you must take it one day at a time, because if you don't, then you may go insane. Even though I am free, a part of me is still incarcerated. One of my biggest fear coming home was that when I go to sleep, I would dream of being in the prison population, walking the yard, talking to guys, doing prison things. This is something that constantly plays with my mind. So I do get sleeps, but I get like nap sleeps. I sleep for maybe 2 hours and then I'm up. And then I go back again and I may get a half an hour and I'm up. I'm not really sleeping like a normal person should have. Maybe society people has the same effect, but for me personally, it's still a struggle. If there is some type of joy in my life, I may go to the mall and I'm just walking through the mall and just enjoying what it is that society enjoy as a human being. But then the thought comes in and like interrupt it and says, what about the guys that I left over at the institution? What is they going through right now? And that kind of put a sense of sadness on the joy. So I'm living a dichotomy. I'm living peace and I'm living sadness, but I'm trying to move forward and trying to cope with how to manage what I'm experiencing at the time.
Andrew so powerfully said, and it's 9 o'clock. I know folks have other meetings to get to and go about their day, but really a powerful note to end on. And I think a really good reminder that for all the work it takes to bring someone home, the work doesn't and shouldn't, end there. And there's so much we need to do to help folks re-enter. So, it's really been an honor for us here at the project to walk this journey with you and with Nate and with Andrew and his colleagues at the CIU. And I hope that will continue to help on your path towards healing, knowing that you can never be made whole after going through this experience. And to everyone who joined us this morning, we really appreciate your continued support. Without you, we couldn't do this work. And so I really hope that learning more about Andrew and his case today and the village that it took to get to this point brings home for you the importance of the support that you give to us.
Yeah, and I'll thank you, Neil. I'll echo that. I can tell you, Morgan Lewis, we have great resources. We could have never come anywhere near this result without Nilam and without the Innocence Project guiding us along the way, and Nilam's brief writing and sharp eye and keen wit. It's critical.
I must say quick that I just want to say that I thank the CIU for coming on the case, and I appreciate you guys, and I encourage you guys to keep doing what you have been doing, because there is a lot of innocent guys who are incarcerated right now, who don't deserve to be there. And because of lack of resource, they are there. And when we heard about the unit coming, it was just electricity that run through the body of these guys. And I've been watching Patricia Cummings. I've been reading her articles when she first came in, and I've been reading everything on Andrew and Patricia, and it gives you such a sense of hope that is undescribable. So I just want y'all to know that I did appreciate you, and you did gave me that extra motivation to stay sane and look forward to one day of exoneration. And the thing is, Patricia says, I'm coming on and I'm going to investigate and I'm going to do the right thing. And that's the key. Just for the people in power, who has the power, do the right thing. If the man is innocent, exonerate him. If the man is innocent, prosecutor, do not prosecute him. If he's guilty, prosecute him. But as an innocent man, you should never administer such a barbaric, cruel punishment on an innocent person. A prosecutor will never know what it is like for an innocent man to sit in prison and withers away. She can never understand it. But I say, me as an individual, I would love I would love to talk to prosecutors that's in training. Just let them hear my perspective of what it is I went through, and you as a prosecutor who has this responsibility, who has this power, because a prosecutor is extremely a powerful person in this country. And I just want to talk to them and let them know, as an innocent man, what I've experienced, because I've experienced so much. I've bottled up so much. I've held so much. And, I still haven't explored my potential, my full potentials. And, it's just the pain and the sadness. But at the same token, you have to move on, because God gave us the ability to moan. And after the moaning, he also gave us the ability to recover and move on with life. And that's the process I'm in right now. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to express, some of my sentiments, and expressed my concern, and talked about, the innocent man who is incarcerated right now with the life sentence. The sentence itself is barbaric. The sentence itself is excruciating. The sentence itself it just takes your dignity away. It takes the sense of hope away. One guy says, I'm going to beat the cop up in a prison because I don't like the way he talks to me. And then the next guy say, why would you do that? You're going to go to the hole, the RHU. And the other person says, I'm doing a life sentence. I have no hope. I don't care if I beat him to death. What can they do to me? I'm already in prison. There is no sense of hope when you have a life sentence. We call them walking deads. Refuse to lay down. I never see myself as a walking dead. Most of the men in the prison with life sentence, this is what they call them, walking deads. Refuse to lay down. I never refused to lay down, because I understand that I was an innocent man. And as an innocent man, I have one obligation, and that was to be exonerated. So I just want to thank you again for the opportunity. And I want to express the fact that the victim family is also suffering continuously as a result of what has been done to them, because they never got justice. Just like I never get justice, they never get justice. Fortunately for me, I'm able to move from one environment to a new environment, and move now with my life. So thank everybody, and I look forward to better things and better days to come. And I just hope God bless us all, and we get a cure for the COVID, because it is like a life sentence. Thank you all.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a happy holiday season and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you all.